It's not just talking. It's building a conversation and then sharing it. Arrow.net, ARROE.net. We are unplugged and totally uncut with Ira Shapiro.
I'm great. How are you, Arrow?
Absolutely fantastic. I can't thank you enough for a book like this because we're not getting the true story in the newspaper or on our social media outlets. And we need a book like The Betayal to really open up our common sense.
Well, I'd love to be interviewed and talk with someone who feels that way. Thanks so much.
We are in a time of change, and so often I wish my mother were here because she lived those days back in during World War II where there was change as well, and she went through the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Where are we in this world today with Mitch McConnell in control?
Well, I think that the focus that I had in the book, and this is my third Senate book, was the fact that the Senate has a particular responsibility, first, to check a potential authoritarian president, and second, to generally help steer and guide the country through times of crisis. And I was shocked in 2020, probably the worst year in American history by some measures, where the Senate failed to play that role, where they basically abandoned the country to deal with a president who was really unhinged in terms of dealing with the pandemic and already signaling the fact that he wasn't going to accept the results of the election unless he won it. So I focus on the Senate because I think the Senate is was the reason for the catastrophic failure of government.
To get that close to the Senate, you have to be looking over your shoulder because the Senate has power. You are an author. You are a journalist. Well,
I'm actually not a journalist, but I am an author. And I agree with you, though, that the Senate does have that power. I'm old enough to have worked in the Senate in the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
I saw how the Senate can function when it's close to functioning at its best. And part of that is that those senators had a concept of what their responsibility was. They had a belief in taking collective action for the nation's good. And they had leaders who felt obligated to work across the aisle and to find common ground. And in that regard, Senator McConnell is very different. He's a very skillful person in pursuing his own objectives, but he's been an architect of division. He doesn't bring people together. He essentially exacerbates the differences that tear us apart.
One of the things that has shocked me as I grow into my elder years is that back in 2016, the word authoritarianism is one of those where it's like, oh, not in America, and then it happened. How many people? I mean, they need to be educated about how serious this is. This is not a television game show. That we are in a situation, and that's why a book like yours, The Betayal, is definitely an eye opener.
Well, I thank you for that, but I think. Look, there are a lot of books that are focusing on the Trump presidency, what former President Trump did, and what he did to essentially move in an authoritarian direction that threatened our constitutional order. My book puts a different lens on this by suggesting that our founders, always recognized the possibility of a corrupt president, overreaching, but they thought we had a strong system that would check that kind of thing, and the Senate was a crucial part of that. So that's why when I think about it, I say, I believe the Trump presidency was a catastrophe for the country and continues to have effects, but the catastrophic failure of government was the Senate.
And you know what's really interesting about this, Ira, is the fact that I've talked with so many people. It's almost like they sure, we're at the midterms right now, but it's like get them over with. Let's get to the next presidential election. I mean, people don't even want to deal with the reality of the moment.
Well, that would be, I think, terrible mistake. And somebody said to me, I wrote, well, your book's pretty depressing. And I said, well, it's also a call to action.
Mm-hmm.
If you actually want to change our politics and make our government work better, the 2022 elections are where to start. Obviously, midterm elections are difficult for the party in power, but the Senate map is quite favorable to Democrats. And if you had 2 or 3 more Democrats, which is a possibility, you change the dynamic in our politics. You disempower McConnell, and you disempower, frankly, Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, because you don't need every Democrat to be together on every issue.
How about that, Mr. Manchin? He came from out of nowhere, and all of a sudden he's making a lot of waves, and I can't figure out what team he's even batting for.
Well, he's had more impact, I think, than any single senator, with the possible exception of McConnell.
Yeah.
But we have President Biden had a very ambitious agenda, as we know, and it was based on problems in this country that were there for a long time and then worsened and became more visible during COVID. Biden's ambitious agenda, however, has collided with the politics of a divided Senate, so that Manchin has an extraordinary amount of influence. Now, I, and maybe you as well, might have thought, as Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois thought, well, Joe puts his mark on the legislation, he gets some things, and then he supports it.
Yep.
But that hasn't been the case. And so my answer I'm disappointed, but my answer to that is what Manchin said at one point. You don't like it, elect more liberals.
Ooh.
I mean, I think we need to elect more Democratic senators.
Speaking of elections, I was recently with David Gergen, and he spoke of that we need a younger Senate. Do you agree with that term? Because, I mean, I like experience, but at the same time, we need to have some fresh blood, basically.
I do think we need a younger Senate.
Yeah.
I think that we've seen bad example of bad judgment when Senator Feinstein, who I've admired for decades, decided to run again at 85. I was just on an Iowa talk show reflecting on the fact that Senator Grassley has decided he needed to run again at 88. That's bad judgment. That's clear evidence of bad judgment. We need younger people, and we have a group of them that are coming up. But I also have to say, there's a lot of good senators who are there, particularly on the Democratic side. And their frustration is they know what the Senate is supposed to be, but McConnell hasn't allowed it to be a real Senate.
Yep. The name of the book is The Betrayal, and it's almost like, it saddens me that someone would say that your book is depressing, and maybe it's because that's just the kind of books I like to read. I go in there and I have an actual yellow highlighter where I highlight the things that I want to learn from, and you're such a teacher in so many paragraphs. Well,
thanks. I mean, somebody said to me it was depressing. Somebody else said to me that it was, a gripping narrative and a must-read.
Yes.
So, and one of my friends said, I loved your earlier books, Ira. This one's more accessible. I said, what do you mean? She said, shorter, and it tells the story.
Right. It does get to the point. So my question is, we live in this social media-driven world. Ira, do you take this and your experience with the Senate to a website to where people can just continuously get information?
Yes, I will. I do have a website that I've recently created, www.irashapiroauthor.com. And I hope, as soon as I get through the first few days of the book launch, I hope to be sharing other thoughts on a continuing basis. But, it's, one of my friends said, you're lucky to be doing radio. You've always had a face for radio. and so I'm really delighted that your show, radio has a powerful effect.
Yep.
People actually listen. The social media, a great challenge to all of us. I mean, it's not entirely clear to me how the social media and democracy work together, and democracy survives the social media, which amplifies so many outraged voices. So I don't believe, I'm not a big Twitter guy, and I don't even believe that op-eds quite get you there. I wrote the book essentially because I thought it was important to make the case in some detail and as fairly as possible.
I know that you've put a lot of focus on Mitch McConnell on this particular book called The Betrayal, but there seems to be a voice that's getting in the way these days, and maybe you don't see it as being in the way, but it seems like Elon Musk is starting to make a lot of waves, and he's making comments about political leaders.
Well, he certainly he's having a powerful impact.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, he has too much impact, just as I think Mark Zuckerberg has too much impact.
Absolutely.
I think it was Justice Brandeis, who I care about a lot because I went to Brandeis University. Justice Brandeis once said, you can have great wealth, great accumulation of wealth, or you can have democracy, but you can't have both. Look, Aaron, one of my arguments about the last 15 years and about Senator McConnell is the growth, the continuing growth of inequality in our country. The tax cuts for the wealthy, the program cuts for other people. And we have, as a country, as a developed nation, where we've got the most inequality. That's wrong. And that's why the Biden, to some extent, the CARES Act and other things that have been done in the last couple of years have, in my view, had a positive effect by helping those people who are working poor, for instance, or lower middle class. But this constant inequality and the crippling of a government that might remedy it, and that's what McConnell has done. If you look at, I call him the architect of division, but I would also say he's a very strong architect of inequality.
So true. So true. Ira, you got to come back to this show anytime in the future. I love listening to your research, your stories, and everything like that.
Oh, I'm back anytime you'll have me. Thanks.
Excellent. Will you be brilliant today, okay, sir?
Thank you, Ira. You too.